Hello, I'm Robin Ashby. I'm a city councillor, I'm an advisor. I have done a lot of things in my life. I've been around the world, I've met many people. And I want to share with you in this series exclusively for South Asian Global Television my thoughts on a range of topics about how we make this a better world that we can all live in. And it's your world, it's your future, not mine. At the end of my career, so many people watching this will be at the beginning of their career. So how can I pass on some advice to you, give you some ideas, trigger some thoughts in your mind about how we can have a better world that we can all live peacefully in and in harmony, and we can create a better world for our future, not just for you, but for my children, my grandchildren, and the great-grandchildren still to come. So this first program of this series is about immigrants and immigration. Immigration is something that causes a great furore in our media. The numbers are the headlines, and nobody really understands what they mean. So that's the first thing that I want to address. But before I do that, what I just want to quote to you is something that was said by the late Shane MacGowan of the Pogues. They have the iconic Christmas anthem, The Fairy Tale of New York. And he said, I'll quote here, I've taken out the swear words, "People are talking about immigration, emigration, and the rest of the thing. It's all nonsense. We're all human beings." So that's what I want up front and center in this talk, which is we are all human beings. We're all in this world together. It's the only world we've got. We're living the only life we've got. How can we make that better? So let's start off with Brexit. Brexit was the vote for Britain to leave the European Union, and it's been blamed on people's reaction to immigration. But is this a root cause? I don't really think so. I think it's very much a matter for debate. We can certainly say that it was a contributor to the greatest act of self-harm this country has ever carried through. And it has divided us. We've divided us almost down the centre. We stopped talking to each other. We stopped listening to other people's point of view. We get repeatedly stories about the new selfishness that's come forward as a consequence of Brexit and COVID. It's changed the way that we react between ourselves, and that is, in my view, is a bad thing. We need migrants in this country because we are becoming ever poorer. Is it a real issue, or is it a fear of immigration that split the Conservative vote and drove a lazy Prime Minister to charge forward with an ill-prepared referendum and then to be replaced by somebody whose explanation of what it meant was, for so long, Brexit means Brexit. Now that's just entirely meaningless. But what it did was to start to drive people away from this country, to drive away skills that we've been depending on for so long, and to create enmity where it did not exist before. So she was succeeded by another Prime Minister who was a showman, not a statesman, who contributed to our instability and division when we needed calm and unity. So the facts are that the net migration into this country was 672,000 for the year ending June 2023. And those are figures that are the best estimates from the Office of National Statistics, the national figures. But this is our first talking point. This is a preliminary estimate. The numbers can and will change, they always do. But the media get hysterical over the first numbers, and they never really report when they're changed, and that we actually get a more realistic figure over time. So there's these figures called the net migration. Now this net migration is a key. This little word net is a key. That's the difference between the numbers of people entering the country, maybe on a permanent basis, and those who are leaving. And that just as there are more people being born rather than the dying, that's a net increase, and it contributes to a growth in the population, and that's a whole other area. So for the moment, any country needs a population that's increasing overall to do the work, to earn the wealth, to pay for the babies being born and raised, for the older people to give up work, and for the ones in the middle who can't work for whatever reason. That is what we call the society we live in. So there are, within these 672,000 net, there are a range of categories of people. So I've just got them listed here and I'll read them for you. The first one is asylum seekers. Then there's people coming to work here. Then there's people coming to train and study here. And family net members being reunited. There are agreed humanitarian admissions that they're called. They're what we would call refugees, and a few other minor categories. Are these all bad? Well, let's talk about the ones that come here as students, like so many here in Newcastle. Take a look at students. What do we get from students? Large numbers of them. They pay fees to our universities and colleges, much more than domestic students do. They keep our universities going. They pay for accommodation, houses, flats, halls of residence. They pay for food and drink and entertainment over and above that which is brought in by locals. They buy clothes. They send gifts home. In other words, they spend in our shops. They learn or improve their English, helping to secure it as the global language in the long term. Hopefully, they enjoy their experience here, so they can go home. They'll always have a soft spot for us in Britain. So, when it comes to doing business or sustaining relationships in the future, they'll be well disposed towards us. And some of the best and the brightest will stay a bit longer to do research, which will contribute to our pool of learning, just as some who helped invent the COVID vaccines did, for instance. In the year we're looking at, there were 282,000 people who came here to study. That adds up to a serious amount of what used to be called invisible earnings for this country. Now, family members in all groups amount to a lot of people though, and it's argued that they cost us. Certainly our government is trying to stop or slow them down, but let's put that aside for a minute too. Asylum seekers, they're people who say they fear persecution in their own countries for a range of reasons, like race or religion or the political opinions. Accepting people who have such grounds are covered by international treaties, which we've agreed to because we can't see ourselves as civilized human beings without it. And it's an obligation, not an opinion. I'll just quote from a little bit of history here. In 1939, a boat full of Jewish refugees from the Nazis were turned away by Cuba, the United States and Canada, and they were returned from there to Belgium. Some were allowed into European countries. 254 of them were later murdered by the Nazis. They certainly right to fear persecution. They came to people's doors, they were turned away. Britain's better than that now, but we still make it hard for people who are genuine refugees. Despite this, the essential goodness of many is not crushed by the bureaucracy and the lack of thought. A while ago, I met a refugee who was trafficked here as a teenager and who's been trying to get what's called settled status. Let's call him MD for the sake of argument. So he told me, the UK is my home now. All my work is my intention to give something back to my community and the people of the UK, as I'm so grateful to the country. Yes, there are problems in my life, everybody has them, but regardless of that, we should all be there for other people. How true is that? Although he's a victim of modern day slavery and trafficking, he's engaged with many local organisations. He puts us to shame. He's worked as a COVID vaccine volunteer, and he helped Newcastle City Council census team to approach local refugees and asylum seekers and to help fill in their census forms online. He sits on the National Advisory Panel of the University of Sanctuary, the UK movement, as a sanctuary ambassador. We're a city sanctuary here in Newcastle, as a trustee of Newcastle's West End Refugee Services. He was the first asylum seeker to be elected as a delegate to the National Student Union Conference, representing fellow students from Northumbrian Law School. I hope that others are listening to voices like his, not those of the bigots and the Little Englanders. He's shown he's already a far better Englander than many of them. His mother told him, "Be there for people and be there for your community. Something good will happen in return." If we want a single theme, a single phrase to sum up what this is, what I believe, that is it. His mother was right. And she would be proud that he's lived up to her standards and so comprehensively started to repay all of us in his new home. I'll be back with more in a few moments. In the first segment, I explained the main types of immigrants are asylum seekers, people come to work here, people come to train and study here, family members being reunited, and refugees. Now, I'm going to digress a little at this point. Of course, immigration is far from being just about ethnicity. As a city of sanctuary, Newcastle is now home to Ukrainians as well as Afghanis who fled their own war-torn countries. Black lives matter in Newcastle now, as they always have. This city's track record is extraordinary and should be celebrated. Only 1 year after the American Declaration of Independence, an escaped slave, Olaudah Equina, spoke in Newcastle. At the same time, Bill Richmond arrived here. He was taught to read and write, courtesy of the Duke of Northumberland. He went on to become a professional boxer of national reputation, arguably the North East's first sporting hero, and he's black. The Northumbrian Earl Grey was Prime Minister when slavery in the British Empire was abolished, only 3 days before the veteran campaigner William Wilberforce died. This was 20 years before the Americans fought their bloodiest war ever and abolished it at last. He also helped to liberate his own people with the Great Reform Act, which extended the voting franchise. That's why ordinary people contributed to his monument in the city of the centre. That's why ordinary people contributed to his monument in the centre of the city, which has become a rallying point for so many citizens protesting or celebrating. Escaped slave Frederick Douglass visited Newcastle to speak in 1846, and 2 Tyneside Quaker ladies raised the then large sum of £150 to buy his freedom. "I landed on your shores as a slave and came back a free man," as he later wrote. He was one of the frequent speakers invited by the Gateshead and Newcastle Anti-Slavery Society and saw education as one of the keenest weapons in the armoury of improvement. There's a plaque in the city to mark where he stayed when he was here, and I've suggested that Douglas Way with 1 S off Old Eldon Square be renamed Douglas Way with 2 S's to commemorate him. In 1853, William Wells Brown, who'd been a slave in the US, visited Newcastle and remarked on the kindness of the Geordies he met here, saying, "In no place in the United Kingdom has an American slave or warmer friends than in Newcastle." Dr. Martin Luther King received the only honorary degree in the UK from the University of Newcastle. His "I Have a Dream" speech still resonates, that one day people will be judged not by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. History's all very well, but what of today? Newcastle is a city of sanctuary, reaching out to those fleeing oppression. But this council had to pass a motion pointing out that slavery in modern garb still exists, and a gang was jailed in 2018 for trafficking. As I recalled in the first segment, community supporter MD from Bangladesh was trafficked here. Now, about 300,000 people call Newcastle upon Tyne their home. Most of them were born here, 82% in fact. But relatively recent immigration is indicated by the approximately 25,000 who were born somewhere in Asia and 8,000 in Africa. And that's why I'm concerned that what we see all the time on UK TV is black minorities. That's not really us. Our largest minority by far are of Asian origin. Broadcasters in particular should not bundle all minorities together as they're prone to do. And that's why one of the reasons I was delighted to be asked to make this programme for South Asia Global Television. The other is that I recognise the huge value that immigrants bring to us. Most of them have grown to adulthood. They've been educated and have that vital get up and go spark, which makes them prepared to move around the world to make a new life and to contribute to our community through their work, creativity and taxes. They'll be making that contribution for as much as half a century to come. And their families born here will help bridge the gap that's forming as our national birth rate falls below 1.5 per couple, and the replacement rate is over 2.2 per couple. So we're moving towards less young people to sustain an ageing population and to help create national wealth to keep them alive, comfortable and healthy for as long as possible. So if you're an immigrant watching this, my message is simple: welcome. It's worth emphasising again at this point that the published figures for net migration, that's the numbers coming in less the amounts leaving. And there are lots of people who leave to work and settle abroad. Not as many as before Brexit, of course, which is one of the issues with the numbers. If you want to retire to Spain, that used to be easy. It's much less so now. Buying a property, getting in and out of the country are both now much more of a hassle. And healthcare in Europe is trickier too. So it's hardly surprising the numbers are down, and that's cutting both ways. We used to have a large number of workers from the EU working in our health sector, for instance. Those that left because of COVID and never came back, and because of Brexit, have had a big impact. The NHS is now short of 120,000 people, and the care sector is down by 180,000. Replacing those trained people organically will take time, if there are any Brits who want to do their jobs. One way would be to put up the wages, but that would mean more money needed for an NHS whose share of national income has been steadily growing over previous decades. In the care sector, rising wages will cause, in many cases, private provision, increasing the fees for older people whose savings and pensions have been squeezed. So now some will have to throw themselves back on the public sector. Again, more taxes will be needed at a time of the ongoing cost of living crisis. As I'm talking on South Asia Global Television, it's worth noting that last year, over 22,000 people from India and 3,500 from Pakistan came to the UK as skilled workers. Another 46,000 came from India specifically as health and care workers, as well as 63,000 Indian dependents. That's an increase of about half on the previous year, and it's something I'll revert to. I sometimes wonder what impact having a Prime Minister of Indian descent has had on encouraging those movements. If anyone can reach the top here, there must be an opportunity for others. And with the Indian Premier League producing the best cricketers in the world, I'm sure there's a place for others following their example. There's a warm welcome for young men and women of ability at Newcastle City Cricket Club, which is located on Broadway West in my council ward. Although most of the committee and the team are South Asian of heritage, the club is part of the Gosforth Sports Association. There are shared facilities with rugby, baseball and other teams, all bound together by the love of sport and community. I'll continue with this topic next time I come to talk to you here on South Asian Global Television.